This morning, you all are getting the annual conference report. All the things, well, not quite all the things, because I'm going to have to do something this morning, mostly so that I need to start a timer so that I don't give Pastor Brian Baker a run for his money this morning. It felt like there was a lot that happened at conference, so I'm like, I need to kind of watch and make sure that I don't get too far into everything. But this was a very different annual conference than many that I've gone to, and I've been going to, as a pastor, I've been going to annual conferences for many years. Even before that, I've been to several before I even got that far. And so this year was a little bit more challenging than others, because one of the very first things that we did was that we took up the question about disaffiliation of churches. There wasn't really much of a question to that insofar as we were taking a formal vote for those churches that had already gone through the process. And so we knew coming into this that this was going to be a more difficult conference, and there was a lot of uncertainty in there as we did that, at least on my part, walking in there and sitting down for the first time, which was, what's going to happen? What's going to go on? How are folks going to handle things? Because I've met people. I know how people can react in stressful and uncertain times, especially in uncertain times. What are we going to do? This is where I really appreciate Paul's words out of Romans 12, especially verse 2 for this morning. Don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you can figure out what God's will is, what is good and pleasing and mature. This, I think, for me, is the goal, what we're trying to do, good and pleasing and mature. And I think in so many ways this was what was coming through all of this process as we were working through it. So when we got to conference, we did our first opening ceremony, and we sang, "And Are We Yet Alive?" which we all sing with a lot more tension than we normally sing when we get to annual conference. Normally that is a time of joy and relaxing, and as pastors we look forward to it because we're like, good, we're all here together. This year is a little bit different. But we came to the disaffiliation. It was the first piece of business that we took up. So we had folks from all over the conference, including the churches that were disaffiliating. Most of them were also, at least had someone, a pastor or a church member in attendance as well for this. And we went through the process of describing how all of this worked and naming the churches that were disaffiliating. We have, in the Missouri Conference, we had about 75 churches that were disaffiliating. That amounted to about 10% of our conference, which, if we look at across the denomination, is about kind of where we're going to land as the denomination. Is at about 10% of churches that have gone through the process. There were some conferences where that number was 40, 50, 60% or higher. And some entire conferences that we're trying to look for, how as a conference do we disaffiliate? And so we, in that regard, we're kind of about where we thought we were probably going to be, but it was not an easy time. We went through the explanation of how all of that worked, and if anyone wants a deeper explanation of the disaffiliation process, let me know. I can do that, or I can just set up another time at some point and kind of go through what all of that looks like again. Because the goal of that process is, one, to follow the process that was set out in the Book of Discipline in that special paragraph, so that churches could do this in a very structured sort of way. The other goal of that process was that it truly was a process, so that the churches that were looking at this could, one, go through and understand what it is that they were doing. And then that they would be ready to take a congregational vote on that, so that they wouldn't get kind of lost in the shuffle, and so that everyone was clear on what was going on. But also as a process of that, where there were things that each church had to do in addition to the paying of 2 years apportionments and their part of the conference's unfunded pension liability. And there was a process of boxes they needed to check off so that they would be legally ready to be their own church afterwards. One of the last things, this is what I appreciate and why this verse stuck with me, what is good and pleasing and mature, was that our conference especially wanted to make sure that the churches that were leaving got the best start that they could, which is that Is everything ready? Are they incorporated? Do they have their tax exempt status? Do they know kind of their responsibilities and all of this as much as possible as they were getting ready to go out? And as we were getting ready to vote, all 75 churches had completed every step in that path and in that process. And so we took the vote, and it was passed something like 98% of all, 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 of us that were there and were able to vote. And that could have been the stop of it. But again, what is the right thing to do? Right thing is to acknowledge that this has been hard for everybody. It's not been easy on anyone. And so we went through a liturgy of saying goodbye. And this was far more necessary than many of us knew that it was going to be. And we started that process. There were many of us, especially those of us that have been a part of the United Methodist Church for many, many, many years. I'm going to be 43 this summer. I've been a part of the United Methodist Church for at least 44 years. So it's been kind of a challenge. Our bishop, who has been pastoring in the Missouri Conference for 41 or 42 years, for almost as long as I have been alive, he has been a pastor, starting when he was 16 or 18. So he's been at this for a while. And we were going through the liturgy, and we were all kind of holding it together-ish until our own bishop, who is not known for his emotional displays, was visibly having trouble and had to take a couple of moments to kind of work through that because it's been hard. But this was our process of saying goodbye. And we came to the end of that liturgy, and we all sang together, all of us that were there, including those churches that were disaffiliating, singing the old hymn, "God be with you till we meet again." What wasn't expected in that was that our conference chancellor stood up to go over and play the piano to accompany us in singing that. I didn't know that he could play the piano. If you don't know what a conference chancellor is, he is the conference's lawyer. In fact, he's part of a larger law firm out of Kansas City, and he leads a team of folks that most of the time they deal with property issues. How do you start new nonprofits associated with a church? How do you handle daycares in churches? Like lots of mundane, normal, legal matters. This last year has been hard on them, but he stood up and went over and sat down at the piano and started playing for us, as we were all very much glad that we knew most of the words to the hymn because we couldn't see many of the rest of them, as we said goodbye. It was a challenging time for us, but we did so with, I think, a great deal of compassion and grace on all sides. There was no one that was trying to make a scene or do anything. We recognized, I think everyone did, that this was a challenge for us. That was the first part of Friday that we did this. Thankfully, afterwards, we took a nice long break before coming back and continuing with the normal business that happens at annual conference, which is the first day we hear lots of reports, lots of numbers, and lots of things that we'll be voting on later in the conference. I did want to give you kind of I know you can't read all of those numbers. I'll put those in an email this week so you can see all of that. But kind of just say, by the numbers of things that happened at annual conference this year, we had 2 special offerings that went to Mozambique and went to Disaster Response Ministries that raised a total of about just over $40,000, and so went a very long way for that. Another class I've realized as I was putting this together that I probably need to teach at some point is, what are all the different levels of what it means to be a pastor in the United Methodist Church? Because at this conference, we ordained 8 full elders, 3 full deacons. We received 1 person into associate membership in the church, and many of you have met him before. That's Reverend Joe Kumanali over at Laclede and Meadville. He is one of 6 associate members in our conference right now. And it was very exciting. You can probably on a video hear me cheering for him as his name was announced. There's a few of us that were very loud and vocal for this. We had 8 folks who were commissioned as elders as they're on the track to full ordination, and 1 person commissioned as a deacon. We had 15 folks that were, we had 5 folks who completed course of study and their journey as being a pastor. 16 folks who completed licensing school this year so that they are now fully licensed to pastor churches. One of those including is Dave Smith over at Buckland and Mount Zion down by the lake, who's been there for about 6 months now and now is fully licensed to preach and do all that is necessary as a part of being a pastor of a church. We had 32 clergy members who entered into retirement this year. And then we had a very special memorial service for those clergy and clergy spouses who passed away. And one of the things I like about this memorial service is that we include, given our long-standing relationship with the Methodist Church in Mozambique, we included 3 clergy persons and 1 clergy spouse from Mozambique who had passed away this last year, as they were remembered as a part of this. So it's kind of by the numbers a little bit. We had some of the things that happen at annual conference, and the reports that we receive are things that different offices in the conference are doing. One of those is talking about the grants that are made available for churches that are starting new ministries, revitalizing older ministries, that are trying something new and different. And so we heard about, there's about $245,000 that went out in grants to help churches start new small groups, start recovery ministries like Celebrate Recovery, to start what are called fresh expressions. I can't talk. That's like Messy Church that we've been working on and we'll be restarting back in the fall once everyone gets back into town. Some that are working on collaborative parishes or starting new worship services. There are grants available for all of those different kinds of things to help churches kind of get started and figure things out. That's a part of our shared ministry together as a conference and as a denomination that we do to help support others as they are reaching people and sharing God's message with them. We also heard reports about several new church starts in this past year, some in St. Louis. One, we were reminded very much at this conference in many ways that Missouri is a very diverse state. And we have a new church starting this last year that is a Spanish-speaking church. And they were getting their start. We had, and another one was a church restart in Kansas City. Just kind of a short story about this church restart. They closed their doors, and then have since at Christmas time, Easter? I don't remember. Central. Okay. I don't remember, but they closed their doors for several months before reopening them again now as a part of Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City. What is special about that church was that 20 some odd years ago, this was the church that sent their associate pastor named Adam Hamilton and about 100 folks out from that church with their blessing to go start a church in Johnson County. And now they have come back and are a part of his church now and sharing in those resources and who they are and that mission. And when they reopened their doors, since they reopened their doors, they are now worshiping 2 or 3 times as many people as they were before that, and that number is still going up. It was a good thing.
They also helped our pastor get rolling again in his ministry.
The church together. I was a member at that church for several years when I was in between times being pastor, and that's where I ended up being an accidental youth director. Still not sure how that happened, but it did. And so we do that. We have new church starts this year, starting in Joplin, Springfield, and Cape Girardeau. And I know our Office of Congregational Development is working on several more beyond even that. Also, lots of different training opportunities and grant opportunities that are coming up for lots of different ways. One training opportunity that I'm going to try and take part in will be in November. That's talking about Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So basically anyone under the age of about 20 or so, maybe even 25, I'm not completely sure where Gen Z starts, but what does it mean to be in a relationship and learn from and help them to learn and to grow in faith? And so we've got trainings for that coming up. They're also, again, like I said, Missouri is a very diverse place. We have additional grant opportunities for places that are starting churches or worship services in something other than English, and also grants available for historically black churches in many ways that have been underserved and in need of help and support as they are showing growth and momentum or just trying to reach out into the communities that they are a part of. So we have many of those kinds of grant opportunities available. Also inside of our next generations, that's what they call ministries that are all kind of together with camping, youth, college age, and kids. I just call it next gen is the way it always gets shortened. In there is they have put together, and I'm glad to see this finally, discounts for curriculum. That anyone who's ever bought curriculum, you know that it gets expensive really fast. They have helped us to find access now to really good and a wide variety of different curriculum and styles, but now have a discount program set up so that it's more affordable for churches like ours. There also is under an initiative from our conference lay leader. She has been working very hard in the last year or so with a team of folks to both join in on a new platform, but also add a whole bunch of new content to this that is a training platform for our lay servant ministries. So if you've ever been to a class over at Joe Oda, and it was all day, you had to write papers, and you had to read books, and it was long, it was time intensive, and it just took up a lot of space. And that is now all coming, will be online, on demand, that you can do on your own, that you can do as a part of a small group with other folks, and a much wider variety of classes that are going to be available for that. We're going to be doing some of those, at least as a church council, and anyone else that wants to join, so watch for more information about that as it comes. But this is an excellent opportunity for accessible and doable training that our conference is putting together. Just some other quick pieces in here. Where am I at? Okay. Like I said, I've got to watch my time this morning because we have one of the other offices on the conference level is Mission Service and Justice, and under them is the Mozambique Initiative. This last year, just over $813,000 came in from our conference to go to Mozambique in the form of support for drilling wells, for the solar panel projects that are being put in, solar panels that are being put in on parsonages in communities, sometimes being one of very few, if not the only source of electricity in those areas, and also the ongoing partnerships like we have with Batula United Methodist Church in Mozambique in support of the ministry that they are doing there as well. That continues to be a very good partnership for our conference, not just for us, but for the folks in Mozambique also. Also, as a part of that group, there is many ongoing conversations that are happening around and training on race and diversity. And I think I was talking to Emily and several other folks about this, that this was the most diverse annual conference that I have been to in Missouri, I think, ever. Also, quite a bit younger than I'm used to seeing at annual conference too. So it was kind of interesting to see that dynamic this year. Lots of folks from lots of different places. You've also heard me talk about the clergy shortage that's hitting not just the Methodist Church, but every denomination, whether Protestant or Catholic or whatever. We're all struggling with clergy. To help us out this year and ongoing has been a very committed effort on the part of our conference, bringing in pastors from other places who want to come and pastor in the United States. We have a number of churches that are being served, especially by pastors from Korea now, as they are here and working and pastoring. So that's another part of what we do. One of the big questions we had ahead of us at this annual conference was, we have 75 churches that are disaffiliating. That's going to put a big hole in anyone's budget. So how do we handle that? Thankfully, we have, I don't know what to call Nate other than incredibly special. We don't ever want to lose him, although I may have started a campaign to get him elected bishop at some point. Don't tell him that. This year our conference budget has gone down by $2 million. Now, we aren't going to see a whole lot of changes in that. They were through natural attrition, through some things that have been budgeted for, but those funds hadn't been used for a while. So part of that was made up from those kinds of things. Another part of that was made up from agreements on the general conference level that agreements in terms of what conferences will be paying and the apportionments that our conference pays to the larger church, and that has gone down significantly. We changed how much that we were giving to Central Methodist University in conversation with Central Methodist about how much that we were sending out to them. Also, one of the, I both like this one and don't like this one. You remember several years ago when we sold all of our camps. Some of that money went immediately into mobile camping ministries and into other places to help support our kids and youth in camps. A lot of that, though, just went into investment funds and has been sitting there for several years. Those funds now are in a place where they are almost completely funding our next generation's conference budget for that. They have been doing well and now are funding that to a great deal. There were some other pieces in there, but that's where a lot of those savings are coming. As our bishop has said, we may be smaller, but we are in a good place. Our conference has been planning for many years they didn't know what was going to come, but they kind of assumed that we needed to be pulling things down so that we don't get hit by something, so that we're ready. So we are looking now, as we're going into this next year, where other conferences are struggling with how do they fill holes and gaps and trying to figure out what to do. We're in a solid, good place looking towards the future and what are our next steps going forward, not trying to figure out how do we fill holes that are behind us. Does that make sense? That is in large part to the incredible leadership we have on our financial team. So that's that. Again, at any point, if you have questions, because there's a lot of stuff here, either come ask me, I can either answer it, or I can tell you where to look. And I'll probably go look with you because I'll probably have the same question after you ask it. We did have 2 non-binding resolutions that we passed this year. The first one, I think, is the one that is the most important. Didn't actually start in the Missouri conference, but started with many of our African conferences. And this is a plan that would make the United States a regional conference, like pretty much every other part of the world in our denomination, are all organized into regional conferences. These conferences are allowed in specified ways to adapt the Book of Discipline for where they are. We don't have one of those in the U.S., and that has caused us all sorts of problems at different points in time because things are different here than they are in Southeast Asia, or here than they are in Europe, even for that matter. And so we passed this resolution. It was with overwhelming support that we do that and that we sign on with that. And I think that's a good move on our part. Just like if you drive down Highway 36 and you start at Laclede, you hit Brookfield, Marceline, and then Buckland. Yes, we are all part of Lynn County, but you don't ever confuse, well, most people don't ever confuse Marceline for Brookfield, right? This helps give us a lot of ability to do things in a different way. One of those, as a side benefit to that, is that currently is the way our polity stands is that folks in other parts of the world have to vote on our clergy pensions in the U.S. They either pay into those pensions, nor do they ever receive anything out of those pensions, but because of the way things are set up, they have to vote on our pensions because that's the way it is. Hopefully, our hope is that that will change in the future so that we can be better organized for where we're going. The second non-binding resolution was one that was to remove the quote-unquote harmful language in the Book of Discipline. And harmful as it is used here is in reference to language in the Book of Discipline that says homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching and limits what self-avowed and practicing individuals who identify as homosexual can do in the larger life of the church. Very obviously, this one was more controversial than others were. There's a lot that I could say about this resolution, but of the 2 resolutions that were passed, the first one was far more important, I think. This one is really what the General Conference is going to be taking up at our next General Conference is what do we do, what do we say, how do we do it, how do we say it. So in that regard, I don't know that this resolution does anything, except that we're getting ready for the next General Conference. Like I said, there's more that I can say about that. If you are curious at some point, come find me and I can fill you in on some more of that. Our bishop had some really good words as we came into all of this. He asked us at one point to look around the room, and he said, we are going to be, from here on out, smaller, changed. We're more diverse than we have ever been, but we are still United Methodist. This is where I like this passage out of Romans 12 so much, because it kind of sets the tone for what our next steps look like. Verse 1 says, so brothers and sisters, because of God's mercy, I encourage you to present your bodies as living sacrifices that is holy and pleasing to God. This is your appropriate priestly service. Basically Paul is saying we need a lot more humility, and we need to double down on discipleship, on faith formation, on knowing who we are as God's people, and on learning about what that means so that we can do this to the best of our ability. Verse 2 we've talked about a little bit. Remember, this is what is good and pleasing and mature. This doesn't mean, as so often can be said, and I don't always like the way this phrase gets used, where folks will say, when some go low, we go high. A lot of times that statement can come across as being very arrogant. What I think this means for us now is that now we are settling in for the hard work. Not that anything has been easy before this, but we're settling in for the hard work, where we evaluate and reevaluate everything that we think and that we know. And even if we don't change our minds, there's nothing in this that says we have to change our minds. What it does say, though, is that we need to know why. Why do we know this? Why do we believe this? Why do we know something to be true? And the big why here is because being conformed to the patterns of this world has gotten us lost so very often to what God's will is. Move on to verse 3, and we talk about the grace that God gives to us, as he gives it to us each a portion, and this is humility and equality. Talk a little bit about humility, but equality here is not everyone being the same, but recognizing that God has given himself to each of us, and fundamentally this means that while we are not the same, we are all equally God's, and that is what unites us. Even if we are different in other ways, we live in different places, come from other places, have different life experiences, whatever it is, we are all still equally God's. And also, as I was reminded by a friend, or by some other folks earlier this week, this is also a statement that says, don't let perfect become the enemy of the good. Sometimes we want perfection, or we want purity. What we really want is good. Because if we have a true understanding of sin, we know we will never be perfect, but we can be better. We can reach to the good that is in front of us. Verse 4, we have many parts in one body, but the parts don't all have the same function. And in verse 5, in the same way, though, there are many of us, we are one body in Christ, and individually we belong to each other. The main point here is that for us, where we are in this time, in this place, our function is to do as God calls us to do. We can get caught up in what's going on in other places and what other folks are doing, but we have to ask ourselves, we have to balance that, knowing that we can be impacted by that, and that we are part in that, just as we are all in Linn County here together. We're often impacted by what goes on in other parts of the county, but we are still us here. First and foremost, we are who God has called us to be in this time, in this place. Remembering that we are connected to far more that are around us, but our first responsibility is to what is God calling us to here? And then how does that connect with the life of the larger church around us? That's what we are looking towards, to keep that first thing first, and then seek to where we go after this. It sounds strange to say as we do this, I am excited to see where we go. I'm looking forward to the days when we will be joining in ministry in new ways and exciting ways, even with those churches that have disaffiliated, that we're still able to work with them, because we're still all together God's children, called to be his people, called to go and to make disciples for the transformation of the world. And I think we are in a place now, as we look to that future, where we are able to see what that means and begin to understand that in new ways. And my hope is for where we go, that we do it to the best that we can, not trying to be perfect, but just trying to do good. And in doing good, we know what is good and right and pleasing and mature in God's eyes. Let us go into that kind of future, and let us go into that in Christ's name.
Amen.